It was one of those rare weekends when the house felt unusually quiet. My sister Emily had gone out of town for a few days, leaving me in charge. It was just me, our dog, Max, and an endless stretch of time. At first, I thought it would be easy, a chance to relax, watch movies, and enjoy the peace. But then Max, with his wagging tail and playful energy, had other ideas. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. Emily adored him, and she was very particular about how he was cared for. Stick to the schedule, she'd said before leaving. No exceptions. But as the hours ticked by, I started to wonder, what would happen if we tried something a little different? It started innocently enough. Max was pacing around the living room, his leash hanging near the door like a silent invitation. I knew Emily had a strict rule about not letting Max out after dark, but he looked so restless. I figured a quick adventure couldn't hurt, right? Just the two of us. The moment we stepped outside, something shifted. Max's ears perked up, and his usual playful demeanor turned oddly alert. It was almost as if he sensed something I couldn't. Still, I brushed it off and let him lead the way. But as we wandered further from the house, I began to notice things. A faint rustling in the bushes, the way Max kept glancing back at me, and the eerie silence that seemed to swallow up the neighborhood. By the time we made it back to the house, something didn't feel right. Max was on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Just as I was about to lock the door behind us, Max froze, his eyes fixed on something outside. I turned to look, but the porch light flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. What happened next was something I never expected. It wasn't just a quiet weekend anymore. It was the start of a night I'd never forget, and if Emily ever found out what we were about to uncover, I wasn't sure she'd ever trust me again. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching Max's leash as he let out a low growl. His stance was stiff, and his eyes stayed locked on the shadowy yard beyond the flickering porch light. My heart raced, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to calm myself, convincing my brain it was probably just a stray cat or maybe a branch swaying in the wind. But Max didn't growl at just anything. "Come on, boy," I whispered, gently tugging his leash. "Let's go inside." Max didn't budge. He stood firm, his ears twitching at every little sound. It was as though he could sense something I couldn't. I looked out into the darkness again, squinting to make out any shape or movement. A faint shiver ran down my spine when I noticed the bushes near the driveway swaying unnaturally, though there was no breeze. Finally, I managed to coax Max into the house, shutting and double-locking the door behind us. I flipped off the porch light and pulled the curtains tight, feeling an odd sense of relief once we were back in the living room. But Max was still restless. He circled the room, occasionally stopping to stare at the front door or the windows. As I sank into the couch, trying to shake off the strange feeling, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Everything okay with Max? Don't forget to keep the door locked at night." Her timing couldn't have been creepier. I typed out a quick reply, "Yeah, all good here," and tried to focus on calming Max down. I gave him his favorite chew toy and settled in for a movie, thinking maybe a bit of normalcy would help. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Every so often, Max would lift his head, his ears twitching like he was still hearing something. A faint scratching noise started coming from the back door. I paused the movie and held my breath, listening carefully. It was faint at first, almost like the wind brushing against the door, but it didn't stop. I got up, tiptoeing toward the kitchen where the back door was. Max followed closely, his nose to the ground and his tail low. I hesitated as the scratching grew louder, like nails scraping against wood. When I finally reached the door, my hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. I didn't want to open it, but I also couldn't ignore it. Something or someone was out there. My fingers hovered over the cold doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to walk away. Max stood beside me, his body rigid and his breath quick. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a raccoon maybe, or a loose branch scraping against the door. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The scratching stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was almost worse. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. There was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just when I thought it was safe to back away, Max let out a sharp bark, startling me so much that I nearly fell backward. "Max, quiet," I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. But he wouldn't stop. He barked again, louder this time, and then started clawing at the bottom of the door. It was as if he was trying to warn me, or protect me, from whatever was on the other side. I grabbed a flashlight from the counter, my heart pounding as I turned the lock and slowly opened the door. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. No signs of an animal or anything unusual. Just the backyard, eerily still under the dim glow of the moon. I stepped outside cautiously, Max at my side, his nose working overtime to pick up a scent. The air was cold, and the stillness felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. As we moved toward the edge of the yard, I noticed something strange, a trail of faint marks leading from the back door to the bushes. "Max, what is this?" I muttered, crouching down to examine the tracks. They weren't paw prints, but they weren't exactly human either. It was as if something had dragged itself through the dirt, leaving behind uneven grooves and scratches. Max growled softly, his eyes fixed on the bushes where the trail ended. I shined the flashlight toward them, but the dense leaves obscured anything that might be hiding inside. A sudden noise, like a low guttural growl, came from deep within the bushes, freezing me in place. Max barked furiously, pulling at his leash as if he wanted to charge in. My hands shook as I tightened my grip on the flashlight, and then, from the darkness, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, staring back at us. The glowing eyes didn't move. They just stared, unblinking, from the dense shadows of the bushes. Max barked wildly, his whole body trembling with energy as if he were ready to lunge. I tightened my grip on his leash, struggling to keep him from bolting into the darkness. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper, but the words felt useless in the stillness. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as I stood frozen with the flashlight beam trembling in my hands. Then the eyes blinked. Slowly, deliberately, my stomach churned as the faint growl returned, this time louder and more menacing. Whatever was out there wasn't running away. It was waiting. Max's barking only seemed to agitate it. The bushes rustled violently, and I could hear the sound of branches snapping under some unseen weight. My mind raced. Should I run back inside, call for help? But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, every instinct torn between fight and flight. The growling grew closer, the sound vibrating through the still night air. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from the bushes. It was low to the ground, its movements slow and deliberate. At first, it looked like an animal, but as the flashlight's beam caught its shape, I realized it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It was covered in matted fur, its body twisted and uneven, like it didn't belong to this world. Its glowing eyes stayed locked on me, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I felt like it was sizing me up. Max barked again, straining so hard against his leash that I thought he'd slip free. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice shaking as I pointed the flashlight directly at it. The creature flinched, recoiling slightly, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a bone-chilling screech that echoed through the yard. Panic surged through me as I yanked Max's leash, dragging him toward the house. My feet slipped on the dirt as I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature didn't follow right away, but its eyes stayed fixed on us, watching every move we made. Just as I reached the door and shoved Max inside, I heard the sound of something heavy slamming into the fence. The creature wasn't giving up. It wanted in. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling as I fumbled to slide the deadbolt into place. Max barked furiously, his paws scratching at the door as if he wanted to get back outside. "Max, stop!" I gasped, pulling him away. "We're safe in here." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The thud against the fence came again, louder this time, followed by a scraping noise that sent chills down my spine. I backed away from the door, gripping the flashlight tightly as if it could somehow protect us. Max paced restlessly, his eyes darting between me and the windows. I tried to think. Should I call Emily? The police? But what would I even say? That some thing was trying to get into our yard? They'd think I was crazy. Before I could make a decision, the lights in the house flickered, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. My stomach dropped. "No, no, no," I muttered, scrambling for my phone. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow around the room. But when I looked at the battery, it was nearly dead. Max growled low. His body tensed as he stared toward the back of the house. My heart raced as I followed his gaze. The back door's glass pane was dark, but I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the frame. I held my breath, waiting, watching, but nothing happened. Just as I started to convince myself it was my imagination, there was a sharp, deliberate knock on the door. The sound froze me in place. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor or a delivery driver. It was slow and heavy, each thud echoing through the silent house. Max barked again, lunging toward the door, but I grabbed his collar and pulled him back. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. Just another knock, harder this time. I inched closer to the door, holding the flashlight like a weapon. My heart pounded as I peeked through the curtain, expecting to see the creature. But instead, there was a man. He stood perfectly still, his face obscured by the shadows. He wore a dark jacket, and his hands were stuffed into his pockets. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of relief, until I noticed something in his other hand. A leash. My breath caught in my throat. The leash wasn't empty. At the end of it was another dog. Or at least, that's what I thought it was at first. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't a dog at all. Its body was hunched and unnatural, its head tilted at an odd angle, and its glowing eyes were the same as the ones I'd seen in the bushes. The man knocked again, this time with more force. "Open the door," he said, his voice low and unnerving. "I think you have something of mine." Max growled louder, baring his teeth as he pressed against my legs. My pulse raced as I backed away, trying to make sense of what was happening. The man didn't move, but his grip on the leash tightened, and the creature at his side let out a guttural growl that echoed through the night. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about the strange creature anymore. Whatever this man wanted, it was far more dangerous than I had imagined, and somehow I knew opening the door wasn't an option. I stood there, frozen, staring at the man and the twisted creature by his side. My heart raced, and Max's frantic barking only added to the tension. The man's cold gaze pierced through the window, his hand still gripping the leash like he was waiting for me to make the first move. "I know you're in there," he called softly, his voice unnervingly calm. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." I felt a wave of panic rise within me. The creature at his side, half dog, half something else, shifted restlessly, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. It was almost as if it recognized me, or maybe it was just hungry. Either way, I wasn't sure I could survive another encounter with it. Why are you doing this? I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. I tried to think fast. Was this some kind of sick joke? A prank gone too far? The man tilted his head, a small smile forming on his lips. You don't remember, do you? I guess it's been too long. He paused, his gaze flicking to Max before returning to me. You were supposed to keep him safe. Max's ears flattened against his head, sensing the danger, but he stayed close to me, his body stiff with fear. I shook my head, trying to process his words. What are you talking about? Who are you? The man let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. I should have known it would be hard for you to remember. It's been years, but you and your sister, you were part of something much bigger than you know. He stepped forward slowly, and for a split second, I thought I saw the creature's eyes shift to something more human, more familiar. My stomach churned. Before I could respond, he lunged for the door. The creature growled, its sharp teeth bared, but Max was already charging forward, leaping at the window as if to protect me. The man froze, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Max. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped back and whispered something under his breath. Suddenly, the creature whimpered, its posture shifting from aggression to submission. The man clicked his tongue and gave a short command, and just like that, the creature obeyed, retreating back into the darkness. I stared in disbelief, my mind spinning. What just happened? I whispered. The man didn't respond. Instead, he gave me one last cold look, as if deciding whether to say more. Finally, he spoke. Don't worry, it's not over. It never is. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with Max and 1,000 questions. I stood there, frozen, my heart still racing, trying to process everything. It wasn't just a strange encounter or a simple threat. This was bigger than I could have imagined. And whatever it was, I had a feeling this wasn't the last time it would come knocking. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the sound of Max's breathing the only noise in the otherwise quiet house. The man was gone, and the creature, whatever it had been, was no longer lurking in the shadows. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. What did he mean by, "It's not over"? Who was he, and why had he come here? And what exactly did he think I was supposed to remember? Max's whimper brought me back to the present. I knelt beside him, running my hand through his fur to calm him down. He nuzzled against me, as if seeking reassurance that everything was okay. But I knew it wasn't. There was too much I still didn't understand. I looked around the house, my gaze landing on the still locked door. Despite the man's disappearance, a lingering sense of danger hung in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened tonight was just the beginning. Max, sensing my unease, stayed close, as if he knew we weren't safe just yet. I went over everything in my head. The strange growls in the yard, the creature with the glowing eyes, the man's cryptic words. I thought back to all the strange things that had happened before, moments that had never fully made sense, small things like Max's odd behavior at times, the way he would act strangely around certain people or places. Could it all be connected? Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Emily. I just landed. Everything okay at home? Let me know when you get a chance. I stared at the screen, the words feeling like a distant echo. She had no idea what had happened. I didn't even know how to begin explaining it to her. Would she believe me? Would I sound insane? As I typed out a quick reply, a thought crossed my mind. What if this wasn't just about Max or me? What if this was something much bigger, something tied to the past we had both forgotten? I locked the door again, this time with a heavy heart. Tonight, something had changed. The world outside my home wasn't as simple as I had believed. Max whimpered softly as I turned off the lights, the weight of the mystery still heavy on my chest. We weren't done with this, not by a long shot, but for now, there was no more running. Whatever was coming, we would face it together. And in that moment, as the house settled into an uneasy silence, I knew that no matter what the future held, I couldn't escape the truth anymore. The past had finally caught up with me.